Hello everybody out there in YouTube land, this is Roy Cutter from Rectitude Media, and today we're going to be doing a video on the failures of socialism. Don't mind me, it probably sounds really lame. But anyways, we're going to go back about 4 years, back when I was kind of doing more stuff with the NDP and local groups. Was doing more videos for my channel and stuff like that for local community groups. Like, I think the first thing I started doing when I first came up with this channel was like a Kadesh. It was like a women's shelter thing that they were raising funds for and stuff, and I was doing a lot of stuff with the NDP at the time, because that was before they got Trump derangement syndrome, and yes, we do get that up here in Canada, believe it or not. The infection has spread far and wide. But this was at a time back when the NDP was kind of more sensible. They were talking about, pretty much, I think it was like lower taxes for entrepreneurs, like small business owners, and that's something I definitely could get behind, because it was helping local people out as opposed to the big corporate welfare systems that we have by the Liberals and the Conservatives. And I was pretty much voting for that and going for them because they were the third party option, just because I knew that unfortunately the Liberals and the Conservatives up here in Canada are left and right wing of the same neo-lib bird. And they're all globalists. They're all giving on to like the same kind of stuff that the UN agendas and crap like that. But anyways, there was a local group of people that were running a soup kitchen. The church is here in Woodstock. And I remember talking to them, and they were talking about the idea for Bullwinkles Eatery. And they were doing it at this place called the Moose Lodge. And the Moose Lodge here in Woodstock is kind of like a place where they'll let you host like different types of events and community functions and stuff at either free or to very, very little low cost, just to kind of keep the lights on there pretty much. And they had a kitchen where they would do they would offer stuff like that for their events and whatnot, and people really kind of seemed like go there on a regular basis kind of thing. And so when I first was hearing about this proposed idea, I was getting involved in a bunch of different local stuff. Like there's a group that does like a kind of a farm to like from the farm they kind of do like delivery stuff, where it's pretty much they'll take like vegetables and stuff like that from a farm, and they'll pay the cost that you're putting into the program for like the food delivery thing to your door is something that is very kind of the money goes mostly towards the farmers and then delivery drivers, so they kind of have this thing where it's been pretty successful. But this is something completely different. This is it was originally proposed as a restaurant where you could pay anywhere from 50 cents to $7 per person once a week, because obviously they couldn't do it as an everyday thing. They would have gone out of business in a year, let alone 3. And I guess they managed to either get some starting donations and stuff like that, but like most things, you know how it is, they'll start off with a bunch of money and, thinking that people are going to be able to, that most people will be like, oh, $7, I'll pay that. But obviously that wasn't the case, and people were paying the bare minimum. And also it didn't help that the people who were coming up with the restaurant idea changed it from not just a restaurant, but to an all-you-can-eat buffet sort of thing. So a lot of people would go there being like, hey, this is awesome. Let's go here to this restaurant that's really, really cheap. Let's pay like $1 or whatnot, eat as much as we can. And then that'll apparently pay for everything, because they're thinking, the more people that would show up there would pay, more and more money. But the thing was, a lot of people, with the food costs that have gone up, with the carbon tax and everything that's been, even the minimum wage here in Canada helped raise some of the food costs up a bit. Sorry about that. There's stuff going on in the house here. I live with a bunch of people. So anyways, unfortunately, they ended up going out of losing lots of money about 2 years ago, and the people who originally were in it, they ended up having to close the eatery for a very short period of time. And I guess there was another group of people that were like, oh no, this is such a great idea, let's keep it going. And so they put some local funds in, some donations and stuff of their own money, and put it into there. And sure enough, about a week ago, it was announced in the papers that they had run out of money, which is usually how it goes with any kind of socialism. Like, you hear about this all the time. People that try to do like a store where it's like a pay as much as you think. They'll give like a they'll give you like a price of how much it costs for them, the store, where they don't make any money, and then they'll also give like a cost of like what it would be where they would make money to be able to pay stuff. And obviously those stores never really last a long period of time. Like they'll get a buzz about it by some left-leaning or socialist newspaper or whatnot in bigger cities, but where we live right here in Woodstock, it's very rural. It's actually kind of the Oxford County dairy capital of Canada. I'm sure there's probably some Quebecers that would disagree with the dairy capital of Canada point, but sure enough, they went out of business, and I just happened to, because I have this hobby of following local municipal news. Like I'll watch City Hall in the background, and man, is it mind-numbing. And most of the time, aside from like hearing about like some like the occasional time where they try to put in like a housing like a complex or whatnot too close to like a church and like an old folks home, and then you see all the old people that are there at the city hall that night that are complaining and stuff like that, trying to get their voice heard. And that's pretty much how local politics works for the most part. But they gave out 33 grants, and I happened to notice that one of the grants was for the Moose Lodge. Now, not only did this horrible idea for a business model lose money. I mean, here I'm thinking, okay, well, they must have gotten to a point where they had to close abruptly because they ran out of money. They were like, oh no, next week we don't have enough money to do the buffet or the food costs that we want. Well, apparently that wasn't the case, because they've had to apply for a $2,500 grant from the city of Woodstock to compensate for the loss, I guess, of the money that was incurred for this horrible business idea. And that's pretty sad. If not only did the socialist Bullwinkles Eatery fail to such an extent where they weren't able to keep going, but they actually managed, I guess, to keep it going while incurring mass amounts of debt. And sure enough, like every other socialist failure, the taxpayers have to bail them out, apparently, to the sum of $2,500. Now, I see plenty of different businesses here in Woodstock, mostly because we are kind of farm to like a rural kind of sense of where we get a lot of our money, and also auto, because we have a Cami, we also have Toyota. So a lot of it is car industry here in Woodstock. So with the prices of everything going up, it's kind of interesting that a lot of different, I've noticed a lot of restaurants, because we also have a college here. And the thing about college is that they do this thing where they'll take a business course, and then they'll be like, oh, I can run a business now. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up one of like 30 different pizza places that we have here in Woodstock, and they'll be like, oh, well, I took a business course, so I got a grant from the government, and sure enough, we're gonna make this thing work. And then a year later, just because there's so much competition, wages have gone up, people aren't able to spend as much money as they were able to before, aside from a small group of people who, they obviously have their loyalties. Like, there are people where I live who do have money, but they'll be like, okay, well, where are we going to go? And they're not going to be like, I know, let's try out all of the 50 different types of restaurants or similar restaurant chains that they have. No, they have a loyalty to a specific brand. Like a lot of people I noticed will go to Kelsey's or Montana's, or Swiss Chalet is one that gets a lot of loyalty for their customers, even though I find their food to be a little bit overpriced for most of them. I'm more of an Eastside Mario's kind of guy, or like, I'll go out to like a few places when I can, but I mean, I've been trying to stay away from buffets and restaurants in general, just because I've been like losing weight and working my ass off, so I don't want to waste it. So, unfortunately, they managed to go out of business because of this whole just horrible idea of what they were doing. So that just goes to show you another failure of socialism. And you see that a lot, like I said before, with different restaurants and stores and stuff like that. So sure enough, they managed to go out. And the sad thing is that, the taxpayers end up having to pay for these just horrible ideas when it comes to business models of people that, they start off with a good intention. And hey, I'm all, I'm not technically against the idea of feeding people to the point, like, if you're going to do it as a charity, then do it as a charity sort of thing, and then just take donations and do it maybe once a month sort of thing. And, a lot of Christian places, like, I could see them, taking some money and putting something like that towards it. Because that's something that's more of a sustainable model. That's something that, you can maybe 1 month, say, if you don't have the money for it, you could be like, I'm sorry, we don't have money, so we'll do it the next month or whatnot, and save up money that way and then put it into it. So I'm not against charity or helping out people who, like, the costs of everything are going up here in Canada. Now, I'll talk to a few of my of people that'll look at the GDP to debt ratio here in Canada, but they won't look at the household debt, which is at 50% for a lot of places. So a lot of Canadians are up to their necks in debt, and it's not looking good. And the thing about that was, when you raise the minimum wage, I know I've already mentioned this before, but it happens to raise the prices of a lot of stuff. It raises the prices of the businesses and the food and stuff like that, because they're having to pay operating costs. And so obviously that's going to cut in for the amount of people that actually go out and do eat at places. But the people that do have money, that don't worry about it as much, that are able to pay their bills and have plenty of food on the table, when they do go out, they'll be very loyal to specific types of restaurant brands or places that they go where they know their friends will go out on a Friday or Saturday night kind of thing. We also have a group of elderly people that pretty much what they do is they like to go to certain places that have buffets. Like, there's an Asian buffet for about $10 on weekdays during lunch, and the odd time I do go in there, maybe once every 2-3 months, I'll see that there's a group of dedicated elderly people that go to that buffet because they know it's affordable, they know they get a good selection, and they know that the amount of them going there paying that price will actually give them good service. They'll get a good fill and probably have a good conversation. So unfortunately, Bullwinkles has gone under, so that's kind of the moral of the story. And not only that, they've incurred massive amounts of debt that the taxpayer have to pay them through government grants through the city, to be able to make up for, I guess, the loss that they did. So instead of just shutting down when they should have probably months ago, I guess they decided, hey, we're going to go deeper into debt and then try to get a city grant out of this. So, whether or not that was made a decision that was made mindfully, or if that was a decision where it was made out of desperation, there's definitely some criticism to be put on there. So once again, another example of letting people decide when you try to do these restaurant ideas, or the buffet thing was definitely a stupid idea from anyone, because I'm sure even if everyone paid $7 that went there, they still probably wouldn't have been able to pay for all the food costs and the people costs there. So yeah, it just goes to show you again that, not everything can be free, and not everything can be based on, a Marxist kind of interpretation of appealing to the, or catering, or changing entire business models to suit the poor class of people that don't have the means or whatnot. And with the rise and increases of prices here in Canada, it just goes to show you that it's one of those things that it's just not a sustainable business model. You need to be able to charge enough money so that people, not to the point where, and then this is the problem for restaurants that, or even buffets or anything like that. Like, we even have a successful buffet that's changed hands about 4 different times here, just because they have problems trying to bring in people to pay that right amount. A lot of people were just going at lunch, and so the evening they would raise the price about $4 for the dinner buffet, and they were noticing that they were having problems with that, and so I think they've reduced their hours to kind of like compensate for that here, and it just goes to show you that, I mean, you can't keep relying on a service-based economy, especially when you have lots of costs and rising rising prices for everything, for your operating costs. You can't just let people lowball you, like especially 50 cents. I mean, a lot of people were taking advantage of that, and unfortunately, the more people that did that, the faster the place closed. So I'm actually surprised that they lasted 3 years, even though they had to stop it 2 years in, and the last year, I guess they were maybe running a complete negatives and just thinking that I guess they were gonna get bailed out through donations or something. I don't know. It's just a really bad business model. But anyways, I'm just gonna leave it at that. And yeah, unfortunately, they are out of business. And so another, so people who were relying on that, I guess, now have to put more pressure on the food bank here. And there's also another article that I'm going to be talking about, where I guess there's a bunch of Muslims that want a separate food bank from the regular food bank. All right, now, like, food bank usage here in Canada has been going up, and sure enough, you get these people that want us to cater towards a group of people that already are making tons of money off of the Canadian government. They have their place paid for what I've heard, up to 4 years, which is ridiculous, because my grandparents, when they came originally in the 70s, back, I think it was the 70s or the 80s, somewhere around then, when my grandpa came, he had to make sure that he had money when he came over here to live, and that he had a job when he came over here to live. There was no, we're going to pay for everything. Like, they had to live off of spaghetti to the point where my mom can't even eat spaghetti nowadays, just because she ate it pretty much every day for about a year when she first came to Canada from England. And there were no handouts. There were none of this, they had to work their ass off to be able to get citizenship, and also to be able to get a family doctor and all that jazz. So it really does kind of anger myself and my family when we see stuff where there's a bunch of people who are trying to say, oh, you need to cater to us, and they want a completely separate halal food bank. And I'm sorry, but if you're starving and if you're hungry, then you should have to settle for whatever you're getting there. I mean, it's sad, but our food banks are already stressed to the point where it's already ridiculous. And I don't see why we should cater more to a group of people who definitely, and I think it was funny because they did this, there was this whole thing, it was like, they were saying, it was a thing that was going around, and all the lefty newspapers tried debunking it and said, oh no, it's not true that that seniors don't get as much money as these refugees that are coming in here. But it was later shown that if you add all the costs of what they're getting, there's also prioritization of refugees over Canadians and veterans who are not, if you add the costs of the medical, the education and the training, the how some families are getting thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Canadian benefits, and prioritization over Canadian citizens, when it comes to medical, when it comes to education costs and stuff like that, yeah, we are kind of favoring these fake refugees over our own citizens, and I think that needs to stop. So that's kind of a separate issue with the halal food bank, which I don't think a lot of Canadians are very much against. And at this point, I think the Liberals, if they try to do some sort of thing like that, it's not looking good for them anyways, just because of how much of a moron Trudeau looks like already with all the stuff that he's been doing. And I mean, if you look at what happened in Alberta with Jason Kenney winning with a conservative 3-to-1 ratio win when it comes to the seats there. And now, it's funny because even the National Post and a bunch of other websites and newspapers have been saying, "Oh no, the NDP are down but not out," kind of thing. But when they pissed off the Alberta people as much as they have right now with all the pandering that we're doing, it's gotten to a point where I think come this election, a lot of people are going to be voting for Scheer. Myself, I don't fall into that whole left-right paradigm. I've been watching a lot of the Canadian Libertarian. I love his videos because, he's critical when, you know, on because he has principles, and I really do respect that. But it's kind of funny how, in my opinion, it's the PPC, because like I have like experience with a local like group. Like I've gone to many different meetings, and all those people are either very conservative or libertarian. Like they're not the typical globalist conservatives. Like they're very awake to the UN Migrant Compact. They're very awake to the UN agenda and 2030, and the fact that we need to renationalize our own currency. You know, from the 1974 amendment to the Bank of Canada Act, which was kind of like the U.S.'s 1913 Federal Reserve Act, which took away the power of printing our own currency and paying ourselves back, kind of using ourselves to print out money like a treasury kind of thing, and then not charging ridiculous amounts of compound interest. So we're constantly paying back, you know, so that every debt of money that's borrowed into existence has a certain amount of debt accumulated to it. So it's a huge spiral. I'm sure a lot of people that are watching this right now know exactly what I'm talking about. But so it's definitely one of those things that's just like not fiscally not fiscally responsible to do things that we're doing right now, because it's going towards that cashless society where they can just and a lot of people are like, well, who cares? I don't use cash. You know, I always use my debit everywhere I go. But it's like, yeah, but what happens if your card stops working, or, you know, through either accidental or nefarious means, or, you know, those people that have those tap cards, if you have your card stolen, or people that can take your can steal your information if you don't have like a pocket blocker or whatnot around your debit cards or your cell phones and stuff like that, is all information that people can take off of you in a very easy sort of way. I mean, money, it's fiat, you know, it is a total Ponzi scheme when you think about it, but at the same time, it's also good to have physical money, because you can always, you know, buy stuff, unless you're in one of those big city things where they look at you if you try to pay with things with the cash, as if you're some sort of like, you know, troglodyte or cave person or whatnot. But yeah, so I'm just going to leave it at there. That just goes to show you that a local example of socialism that obviously did not work. And you see a lot of these business models where they try to do like a pay what you can or pay very little, and it always ends up falling onto the costs of either the people that are running it or taxpayers. In this case, this is what happened with the Woodstock City Council giving grants to the Moose Lodge to keep them, to recompensate them for all the money that they lost from running a really bad idea for a business. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for listening. I was going to not turn this into a 1-hour video of me ranting. So, yeah, all right, keep on rocking in the free world, and thank you very much for listening. Peace.